it's really, a wonderful pleasure to introduce Sergei. I realize I've never introduced Sergei before ever, and it's really quite nice. I would tell you that Sergei has done some great work that he's going to tell you about today, but I've been fortunate enough to be part of some of it. So take it with a pinch of salt. But I think over Sergei's 3 lectures, you'll find really a variety of different ways of looking at ecosystems, showing you that there's still even though we're at day 10 or 11 of the school, it's still there's still new ways to think about things. So it's not always about linear stability analysis and looking at Jacobians, as nice as those are. Sergei, before doing microbial communities and ecosystems, has worked on a variety of different things, some of which he was telling us during the roundtable. So really, this is just a slice of the things that he's interested in. Feel free to talk to him about other things outside of this. And let's keep this session interactive. Over to you, Sergei.
Thank you very much, Akshit, for inviting me over. This is my 3rd visit to NCBS specifically. And I'll tell you today about the life, death, marriage, betrayal, and all inconveniently enacted in a safe world of microbial ecosystems. Before I will kind of move on, let me acknowledge collaborators on this part of the project. So many of you are laughing because you barely recognize Akshit, but let me just walk you through who are my collaborators on this project. Veronica, she was a PhD student in my lab. Right now, she is a postdoc with Katie Pollard at UCSF. Parth, who was my postdoc at the time, now he is a junior faculty in India. Yulia is actually my classmate in high school, mathematical high school number 57. She is a mother of 4 and a mathematician extraordinaire. So many of the mathematical details of the work I will present today and tomorrow have been worked out by Yulia. And of course, Akshit doesn't need introduction here. And as you recognize, one of the main changes which happened to Akshit is that he grew a beard. So he is somewhere on a transition between this to this to this. He is not there yet, but he's going. Also, it's another interesting aside here is that many of my collaborators are one way or another are connected to Sergei. So Parth was his student. So in some sense, he was in a scientific genealogy is his son. And Akshit, as many of you know, is Sanjay's grandson because he's a student of Sandeep Krishna, who is also my long-term collaborator, who is Sanjay's scientific son. So the genealogy is strong here. Okay, now in this conference or in this school, we have been focused on ecosystems, and we haven't really emphasized microbial ecosystems so much, at least not in the recent few lectures. So I'm contractually obligated to remind you that microbes are important. They're everywhere. They're everywhere outside of us, and they're inside us. They affect our health because they occupy our skin, our gut. They affect obesity, allergies, diseases, even may change our mental state through the so-called gut-brain axis. They also feed us. The microbes are responsible for helping plants thrive. And without plants, we all will be dead because they are at the bottom of the food chain. And finally, they help us breathe. So the microbial phototrophs generate more than 50% of oxygen we breathe. And also they affect the climate by modulating the carbon sink in the ocean, which we still understand quite poorly. So again, the focus of my lectures, at least today, will be on what is known as alternative stable states and transitions within them, which are known as regime shifts. This is one of the pictures which shows that indeed those 2 lakes, which are obviously in the same geographic region, somewhere in Michigan, can be in quite different states. One is transparent, oligotrophic, the other is cloudy or eutrophic. So this eutrophication is in fact a poorly reversible transition between the states. And we have seen already this plot in one of the lectures. I'll just remind you what is going on. You change the concentration of one of the essential nutrients, the phosphorus in this case. And as you increase this concentration, at some point you give, for instance, the phosphorus is an important nutrient because one is we all require it for life, and second, it is easily leaks into lakes and rivers because of the agricultural runoff. So if you just keep increasing your agricultural runoff, at some point your lake will transition from this clear state to the cloudy state, and it will take a while for it to transition back. So you need to lower the phosphorus concentration after you suffered this collapse, this regime shift. It will take a much, much lower concentration of phosphorus for it to switch back to a clear state. And again, this is one of the sort of cleanest examples of regime shifts in ecosystems in nature. But since we are also interested in human gut, it is much less clear how many regime shifts exist in a human gut. I will show you this work, which is in vitro, and it is a competition between two bacteria. The Bacteroides theta iota omicron is one of the most abundant Bacteroides species in the gut. And this Klebsiella species is something which is responsible for so-called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth disease. And the regime shift which you experience here, again, if you look at these two plots here, this and this, you will see that as you change the oxygen flow rate, you will have a shift from basically hysteretic shift between the two stable states involved in those two bacteria, and that is driven by their differential sensitivity to oxygen. One of them is a strict anaerobe, the theta iota omicron, whereas Klebsiella is a facultative anaerobe. So the other kind of signature of those regime shifts and alternative stable states is so-called priority effect. I don't remember we discussed them a lot. This is kind of the one of the best illustrations, best experimental illustrations of priority effect. It involves a community of 6 single-cell organisms, protists, labeled by those letters from B to E. And if you start colonizing the community, I believe it is in vitro, from the empty state here, and of course, each one of those 4 organisms, C, T, B, and P, can live on its own. So if you introduce either one of them, you will end in a state with just one organism. And then you can, for instance, try to add B, and it will transition to the state BC. If you will introduce P, instead of getting a state PC, P will outcompete C and will go to this state, and then so on. So all of those arrows are all possible transitions between different community states, and some of them are actually quite bizarre. For instance, if you reach this community state with 3 organisms, P, C, and T, you can introduce, for instance, just one organism, E, which seems to be a nasty bug, which kills everybody and doesn't even survive itself. So you introduce E, it kills C and T, but doesn't really get hold of in the community. The same happens if you introduce the P and C. So overall, it's as you see, it's a complicated maze, reminding something like a snakes and ladders board game, where you can go up, 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 but then suddenly you get a nasty bug and you will go down in complexity of the community. And while I don't have a comparable sort of picture for gut, there is this nice work by Will Ludington, who studied the gut of fruit flies, and he noticed that the priority effect is very strong. So whatever bug you will introduce early on will usually typically take hold in the gut and will not allow other microbes to enter, at least among the microbes he studied. So he called it a lottery. In other words, whichever bug you will get first will stay with you with this fly for the rest of its life. And in order to displace this early colonizer, you really need to introduce other microbes in a very, very high concentration. If you really kind of put a lot of other bugs, they may displace, but if you keep the concentration low, they have 0 chance of taking over. This is probably affected by the spatial effect. So in fact, these priority effects are not a very clean sort of chemostat problem, because what happens probably, and I believe that it has been shown by Will Ludington and collaborators, that the gut is full of those crevices called crypts. In humans, at least, in flies, it's less sort of it's less corrugated, but it's still very, very kind of spatially non-homogeneous. And once you kind of colonize some of those crypts or all of those crypts, then you tend to hold on to them just for purely spatial reasons. Again, this is a useful table translating the terms which are accepted in the ecology community to the terms we know as physicists. So alternative stable states and is essentially multiple stable states. Regime shifts are first order phase transitions. I emphasize that they have to be first order and they have to be hysteretic in order for to qualify as a regime shift. It would not do if you just change your nutrient concentration slightly and one of your species gradually goes down to zero, and then another one gradually starts up from zero. That would not be a regime shift. That would be a smooth second order transition, which will not lead to any kind of hysteresis. But if you are really talking about regime shift, your concentration of a species stays high up to the last moment, then it suddenly collapses to zero. And usually, in order to get it back into the community, you need to lower your nutrient concentration to much lower levels until it becomes viable again. And finally, the priority effect is just a simple and common observation that the final state of a hysteretic system depends on its history. Okay, that being said, I will show you today, if I will not run out of time, which is likely, two, I initially called them models, then Matthew gave me actually a very good term. I will call it a theory now, because I have learned the hard way that calling something a simple model, toy model, stylized model doesn't really do well in your grant applications, especially if you put a sentence something like throughout the project of funded, when you fund me, I will play with several toy models. So don't put it in your grant applications. Now, so one will be theory because even though it is simple to understand and has lots of very interesting problems, it cannot be very directly applied to a specific system in question, and the specific system in question are microbes utilizing several carbon sources, for instance, and in a boom and bust environment where they allowed to grow at a maximal speed and then subsequently diluted. So you grow, then you collapse, you grow, then you collapse. And what is important is that the microbes are dioxic in a sense that they have a strict hierarchy in their preferences towards nutrients. You will see in a moment why preferences matter. And even though this theory, which I will present, is nice and conceptually simple, it also leads to some of the predictions which are later verified by more detailed modeling. But as such, it's not really realized in those communities. And what actually happens in those communities, I will tell you in my lecture number 2. And the second one is more of a model, even though it is still a theory because I'm not trying to model something very specific, but I can imagine this being realized in nature or in the lab. And if any of you experimentalists would be inspired by take a plunge into realizing this model in the experiment, I would be more than happy to collaborate. So the other kind of model number 2 involves microbes, which are also competing for nutrients, but those guys in serially diluted ecosystems who are dioxically shifting from one carbon source to another, like proverbial E. coli of Monod switches from glucose to lactose. In this case, the microbes are fighting for nutrients which are different types, like carbon and nitrogen. Both are essential for life. We know that carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and several other elemental kind of ingredients are essential for life. So if one of them is missing, we will not grow. And they are kind of, as we will learn today, there are somewhat different models and somewhat different concepts that are required to describe those mutually exclusive essential nutrients, carbon and nitrogen. But both things are surprisingly unified, that this concept in economics called the stable marriage problem turned out to be relevant to both stories. So I will start by giving you sort of a tutorial and a little, role play exercise for what is known as a stable marriage problem. So let me just really, oh yeah, I forgot about one thing which I decided to plug in right away because it will help you to understand how my brain works. So I am a proud co-founder of a society of bottom-down modelers. So what is a bottom-down model? We all heard about a top-down and bottom-up. Matthew's talk had this beautiful triangle diagram. And a bottom-down model is something where you already start with a model which is sufficiently simple. And instead of going up, you start going down. You strip off all unnecessary parameters until you are left with a bare bones minimum to explain what interests you. And then it becomes a theory, right? Then it stops being a model and becomes a theory. So how do you actually evaluate bottom-down models? If you have a bottom-down model which is interesting and rich in behavior and it has 0 parameters, you get an A+ and Pierre Bach Memorial Award. By the way, Pierre Bach was my mentor, who is a bottom-down modeler extraordinaire. He introduced several really rich models which are parameter-free. But once you have sort of 4 parameters or 5 parameters or more, you fail and you don't have a bottom-down model. So you have to go either up or bottom-up or top-down. So if you have candidates of, but again, you can be a little bit creative in how you count parameters, right? For instance, system size is not counted as a parameter because everybody has a system size. You may group parameters into some dimensionless combinations as long as you show only this dimensional combination matters. But this is how we will rate you. Okay, now back to my theory number 1. And back actually to the foundation, the mathematical foundation of it all, which is known as a stable matching problem. So in the first part of my talk, I will introduce you a stable marriage problem, then I will show you how it is applied to model theory number 1, and then how it is applied to theory number 2. Okay, so what is a stable marriage problem? It's actually an old paper. It all has been written out by Goyal and Shapley back in 1962. And it was called College Admissions and the Stability of Marriage. That is the title of the paper. Now, unfortunately, Goyal died in 2008. If he lived, he would almost certainly would have awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2012. So instead, they introduced, well, maybe not instead, maybe they would have shared it among 3 of them, but Alvin Ross is another economics professor who did a lot of contribution to the stable matching problem in all various forms and shapes. But what we need to know to understand my talk can be found back in this paper in 1962. So let's just introduce what I mean by a stable marriage, or what Goyal and Shapley mean by a stable marriage. So consider that you have a group of men and women. For simplicity, we'll assume that it's equal number of men and women, like those characters from Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And of course, each one ranks, imagine that they all know each other. They live in the same town. They all rotate in the same social circles. And they all know each other enough to make this preference list. So for instance, Elizabeth prefers Wickham, then Darcy, then Bingley, then Collins, and so on. And so each one of them has those preference lists against all the partners of the opposite sex. Imagine then that they get married to each other. How do we check that this marriage is stable? So in order to check that the marriage is stable, you need to look for something called a blocking pair. This is kind of polite way of saying a runaway lovers. And if you cannot find a single pair of runaway lovers or a single blocking pair, then the marriage is declared to be, the set of marriages is declared to be stable. So what is the blocking pair? That's a pair of man and a woman, in this case, Darcy and Elizabeth, who are not currently married to each other, but which each one of them prefers the lover to a spouse, right? If they can if you can find such a blocking pair, then they will run away and say to hell with everybody else. Notice that this is clearly not a physics problem. This is clearly an economics problem. Why? Because we are actually not optimizing some global energy or global happiness of the community. So if it was a physics problem, we would define one global variable like happiness of a community and find the minimum, the maximum of happiness or the minimum of unhappiness, and that will be a stable state. Here, we are checking against selfish decisions. So those guys don't really care what happens to Collins or Lydia. They may remain single, or they may get married and be super unhappy with each other. All they need is to make the selfish act of running away. But this selfish act is also not so simple, because each one of them, there is a sort of and function somewhere. So both Elizabeth and Darcy have to make a decision. If it doesn't work for either one of them, it doesn't work. Okay, so now we understand what is a stable marriage. Now the next question is, are there any stable marriage states for an arbitrary set of rankings? And if yes, then how to find them all? And for this, we will do a little exercise. For this, I need a volunteer, 3 men and 3 women. Please come on stage. And by the way, while you are kind of making up your mind, I'll tell you that stable marriage, soon after its introduction, got picked up by a computer scientist, whom we all know, both as creator of the art of computing programmer, Donald Knuth, also as the creator of tech and LaTeX. So he wrote a first book in 1976, which is whatever, 14 years after the original paper, published it in French in Montreal, and only in 1990 it was translated to English, and that's one of the Bibles of this field, because he may not have sold everything, but he formulated a lot of promising directions to follow. And this is what I know, my little green Bible. I have it on my table. This is a book by 2 MIT professors, Gusfeld and Irving, who tell you everything you wanted to know and more about a stable marriage problem. Okay, now, how about we will have the volunteers. Again, don't worry, nothing is contractually binding here. Just to avoid any unnecessary complications, I would prefer not to have people currently married in this exercise. Other than this, you are completely free. So, any volunteers, please? Well, I will then nominate. Okay, I will nominate. That's the danger of sitting in the front row. I will nominate you, you, and you. And well, Sanjay, maybe not. You, and you. How about this? I mean, sorry, that's the front row penalty. None of you are married to each other, or okay, anyhow. So please come on stage, and we have 2 exercises. So this is a tutorial. Consider it to be a tutorial. So we have 2 exercises. I will first show you. You will assume the nom de plume, which is your sort of stage name. So first, let me assign stage names to. You will be Anna. So you can kind of put it like this, so that the other participants know that you are Anna, you are Beth, and you're Claire. You see the reason why I picked those names, A, B, C. Now, not very inventive, you will be John, you will be Ken, and you will be Larry, okay? So those are your preferences. I assign them to you. And now we will do the first exercise. The first exercise is to find one stable marriage. And the way it works is as follows. So this is actually what has been described in this book by Goyal and Shapley. And it's called man-proposing algorithm. Again, just in the interest of fairness, there is absolutely nothing to prevent the whole algorithm to be run in reverse and do the women-proposing algorithm, which we'll run too in a moment. But for now, let's just do as it was the customs in 1962. So it proceeds in multiple days. On day 1, every man makes a proposal to the woman at the top of his list, okay? So you are just standing here. So you are making a proposal. So you come to I guess, again, I have never run it on stage, then I'm poor theater director, but let's try. So maybe girls, a little bit backwards. So there will be a proposal with some kneeling and so on. So who is at the top of your list? John, sorry. How come? You're John, and you propose to Beth. You propose to her, yeah. Okay. So yeah, but wait. Stand next to Beth. Stand next to Beth. Who else is proposing to Beth? Yeah, you also propose to Beth. Okay, and you are proposing to Claire. Okay, interesting. Now, so if you just got one proposal, you get engaged. That's it.
Sergei, maybe so that everyone else can see the lists, then we can have the participants over here so that all of us can see the tables.
Right. Okay, yeah, I haven't figured out how to run it efficiently. Maybe we can also proceed what is happening in I will also have this right up on the screen. So John and Ken propose to Beth, Larry to Claire. Next stage is Beth gets engaged to John. Why Beth gets engaged to John? For the following reason, that she got a proposals from number 2 and number 3 on her list. But among the people who proposed to her, she likes John better. So she accepts John temporarily. It's an engagement. So you're John, so you're engaged. And you're Ken. Unfortunately, you're rejected, so you have to lower down your expectations. So you didn't get Beth, but you can still get Claire, okay? So you go to the second woman at the top of your list and make a proposal to Claire. Now, suddenly, Claire gets a fiancé and a new proposal. What does she do? Clear. She dumps the fiancé and gets engaged to Ken. So you are now out of the woods. So you need to propose to Beth. Okay, propose to Beth, okay? Beth, you get a proposal from Larry. And Larry is at the top of your list. That is unbelievable. Larry as the top of the list. So poor, who it was, John, poor John gets dumped. And John gets to Anna. And Anna gets a proposal. The moment every woman gets a proposal, that's the end of the story. That's a stable marriage. So this is one stable marriage. This is one stable marriage. Now she accepts. So we got one stable marriage. Let's review this marriage. First of all, let me prove to you that this is indeed a stable marriage. How do I prove it? It's actually a beautiful verbal proof. So how do I know that there is not a single man and woman who are not currently married who can run away? So imagine that you found this block and pair. So if it is, so let's just show that it's impossible to find such a pair. So first of all, if it is between a man and a woman to whom he proposed before, during this kind of way how they were writing down the preference list, obviously she will not accept him as to run away with him. Why? Because it's simple. It's she already rejected him once. So he is worse in her list than her husband. So that doesn't work. What about the other way? If the man runs away with a woman who is lower on his list, it will also not work because she is obviously lower on his list than his current wife, because he was going from top down until he found somebody, and that proves that it's a stable marriage. Okay, so this is one stable marriage, but don't leave. I will actually because we will play the exercise number 2, the exercise number 2. Yeah, well, it's kind of a little bit boring, but we may, in principle, well, you can trust me that this will happen. We could have run in this particular configuration the same process in which women make proposals. And in this particular case, we will end up in exactly the same set of marriages, right? Now let's also review something here. So all the men in this particular situation got their second choices. Let's memorize this, because we will be talking about unhappiness of average unhappiness of men and average unhappiness of women. And the unhappiness is measured by rank. So 1 is the lowest unhappiness, N is the highest unhappiness, 3 in this case. So here the average unhappiness of men is 2. The average unhappiness of women is 4/3. So women are on average more happy here than men. But that is an exception. That is an exception, and I will show you the following. So let's, yes.
Would it also work if the order was reversed, in the sense, not women proposing men, but men going to women who are lower in rank?
Well, then it would not be a stable marriage, right? Because that would almost defeat the purpose in a sense that, how do we prove that it's a stable marriage? Because we go from the top, and therefore anybody to whom you already proposed, you already. So the bottom line, if you go from the bottom, that will not be stable. I'll show you in a moment how to get all stable states, which is also actually instructive. But for now, let's say that generally speaking, when you run the algorithm in reverse, when women are proposing, you are getting another stable state. It's just a coincidence that here we got the same state. And we will show that now I will describe the algorithm how to find all stable states. In fact, maybe we can do it differently. Now let's so we kind of have this perfect marriage, which, by the way, perfect indeed because it is unique stable state. In this state, in this condition, I can show that there are no alternative stable states. And how do I know it? Because if you run the same men propose an algorithm and women propose an algorithm and arrive at the same state, you can mathematically prove that that is the only stable state. You will see why in a moment. Yes.
Can you say the gender that proposes has a higher index?
Yes, 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 and that will be not only higher on average. I can tell you more. In this particular situation, the gender which proposes, I'm kind of jumping a little bit ahead of myself, but this is a good question. So remarkable thing about it is that the gender which proposes, the active side, not only gets on average better deal, but every single man in this stable state, which you get by men proposing algorithm, get the best wife he can ever have in a stable marriage. And every woman gets the worst husband she can ever have in a stable marriage. So that is actually remarkably global, not on average, not statistical physics, but a global. Yes. Well, no, it doesn't, because all I said is that it gets the best candidates they can get in a stable marriage. I said that this is a little bit unusual situation. I cooked up the books a little bit. I made this list very, very frustrated in such a way that men got a worse off deal. By and large, the men get much better deal than women in a men proposing algorithm, and vice versa, the women get a much better deal in a women proposing algorithm. Okay, so let's actually now play a little bit more realistic scenarios. That is, by the way, you are standing in the order of the, sorry, can you now go alphabetically? Whoever was Anna was stand first, you're Beth, you're, just so that people don't get confused. You're Anna, you are Beth, and you are Claire. And now again, John, Ken, and Larry. John, who is John? You're John, you're Ken, and you're Larry. And now we are running a different setup, which is depicted on this slide. Again, a different ranking order. Let's quickly run a man proposing algorithm, which will be infinitely boring, because it turns out that in this case, all the men, you may notice that all the men have 3 different women as their top choices, Beth, Claire, and Anna. The man proposing algorithm ends as soon as every single woman gets a proposal. As soon as every single woman gets engaged, that's the end of the iterative procedure, which means that the whole thing will be over before it started. On the first day, everybody will propose, and everybody will get married in one stable marriage. So maybe let's realize this marriage in a sense that John will propose to Beth, John with Beth. You are Ken proposes to Claire, and you propose to Anna. Okay, this is a stable marriage, and as you see, in this particular stable marriage, here you absolutely see, actually, I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself. I should do this, and in this particular stable marriage, well, here, there are no doubt that men got a better deal. They got a first choice, and all the women got third choice. Of course, I made up everything in such a way that if women were active side, again, 3 different men for 3 different women, as soon as not a single bachelor remains on the floor, the proposing game is over. So then the outcome will be completely different. We will not reenact it. I'll just tell you that if it was a women proposing algorithm, the men will get a third choice and women will get a first choice. But now the punchline of this kind of exercise is how to get other states. Turns out that now we have these extreme states. Men are extremely happy, women are extremely unhappy, women are extremely happy, and men are extremely unhappy. But is there anything in between? It turns out that there is yet another state. And how to get it from the, let's say, imagine that the first state you got is from the men proposing algorithm, which we see right now. How to get other states? Very easy, breakups. So here is how you do it. You initiate a breakup, and a breakup is initiated by a random woman. Well, let's say you break up with who? With Larry. You say, Larry, you're no longer on my list. Now, Larry, again, men continue to be active here, but now they will start getting progressively more and more lousy deals, because rejected Larry will go to Claire. Because Claire got the worst deal of all, the number 3 on her list, of course she accepts Larry and dumps Ken. Ken goes to the second person on his list, to Beth. You're Beth, right? Okay, second, so you say, goodbye, Larry. No, John, goodbye, John, goodbye, John. John comes and proposes to Anna. And this is a key moment. Notice that Anna initiated this mess. She dumped her husband. Now she's waiting for a proposal. If she gets a proposal which is actually better than what she had before, she will accept it, and that will be another stable state. Okay? If she will get a proposal which is actually worse than what she had in the beginning, she said, okay, I changed my mind, takes back, and everything, the whole wheel of Dharma will run in reverse, and you will get back to the original stable state. So in this case, obviously, because you got the every woman got a worse deal, you happily accept John, and you get a second marriage, the third stable marriage where everybody got a second choice. This is kind of in between, like 50-50. From the society standpoint, that's the best deal, because as a society, you will get a, well, actually, it's not clear in this particular example, because if you just average over society, all of those 3 deals will be equivalent. But I will show you in a moment that for large, random, stable marriages, this kind of in between the central states, by the way, there will be more than 3 states. On average, there will be n over e times log n states. This is kind of for random matchings, one can show that there will be roughly n over e log n states. And the central one of them, I will show you in a moment what I mean by central, will be the one which society will prefer. But that's not at all what the ecosystem, the marriage ecosystem gets to when you are having this one active and one passive side. Yes? Yeah, good question. I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, there are many ways to define happiness, and but this is yeah, this is the most natural one. But let me okay. I think we are done with exercises, so you can gladly take back your seats. I hope it will not change your decision to sit in the front in the future. It was not terribly onerous. So, okay. Now let's do a little bit of theory and a little bit of philosophy, just like Matthew did in his talk. Okay, so I already told you how to find all stable states. Women propose an algorithm, usually another one. This is just I wanted to emphasize here, in this particular case, all the divorces will get the same second stable state. In more realistic situation, in larger marriages, you need to go through all possible divorces or breakups and see what kind of stable states you get. As I told you, sometimes your divorce doesn't give you another stable state because the woman who divorced her husband doesn't get a better proposal, then she turns it back. But now, once you got the first generation of sort of divorces, you need to keep breaking up. Basically, the message is keep breaking up for as long as you can, and then the active side will keep going down their list, the passive side will keep going up their list, and the more you break up, the more happy you will be. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, there are a bunch of mathematical papers about the equivalent choices, which I personally ignore because I think that everything is kind of, you know, in ecology and evolution, we always have that either one or the other wins, and all those ties are just historical accidents or something. A more interesting, in my opinion, generalization, what if you don't know everyone? Maybe if you're, you know, depending on how many you know, will shape. So there are all kinds of variants. The other important thing I wanted to emphasize is that right now we had this situation in which it was one-on-one. There is a version in which it was one-on-many, and that is what they meant by college rankings, right? What they said is that the same algorithm can be applied when you apply to colleges you rank your colleges, colleges rank your applicants, and then you can run this algorithm to assign. So there is basically the fact that one side has multiple, opportunities to fill doesn't change anything in this algorithm. And you also might be interested to know that this is actually how the assignment of in US, when you graduate the medical school, you're assigned to a hospital to do your residency. And this is actually exactly the algorithm they run in order to figure out which hospital you will be assigned to for residency. So that's why it's not a college ranking, but rather a hospital ranking problem. Now, let me also give you a few mathematical properties. Yes?
If the same person who had broken up does it again, will it result in another state?
Well, if nothing changed, of course not, because everything is deterministic. But it's possible that if somebody else broke up and there were kind of different perturbations, actually, I need to think about it. My kind of zero approximation, yes, you need to repeat it for, each time you got a new state, you need to again try all the breakups.
No,
but maybe there is a mathematical reason why it is not true, because if you already got a bad proposal, how can you get I don't know.
Now, in this case, for instance, in this example, they landed, the person who had broken up landed with the second choice. And
Yes.
say they wanted another one, and they do the.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, well, you should absolutely break up more and more.
Yeah.
If she would have broken up again, she will push everything to a woman proposing algorithm. Actually, it will be 1-1-1, 1-1-1 for women and 3-3-3 for men.
Like not a good choice, right? Because in that case, like it becomes the women proposing algorithm case.
Yeah, it is not a good choice for a society. Again, we will discuss just right now about what is the best for, quote unquote, best for the society. But right now, what we see very clearly is that whichever side is more active gets a better deal, right? So that is one of the life lessons, which I will highlight on the next slide. But let me first give you the math. The math is actually remarkable. So we didn't see on this simple example, but if you run it for random rankings, the average unhappiness of men in a man proposing algorithm is log n for random rankings. The average unhappiness of women is whooping n divided by log n, right? So you see it's, log n is a small number, but n divided, so basically it's almost n-fold difference between unhappiness of men and women. Some observant people will notice that the product of this and this is n. This is actually not an accident. In all the stable marriages, again, statistically, the unhappiness of men times the unhappiness of women is equal to n. This is, by the way, a cute story about it. So I first learned about the stable marriage problem when I was a PhD student, and I was taking a game theory course at Stony Brook University, which has a very good game theory center. And I was absolutely, fascinated by this problem. And I was visiting Yichang Zhang in Fribourg every summer as a student. Matteo Marsili, whom many of you know, was his postdoc at the time. So I brought this stable marriage to this statistical physics community back in the 90s. Actually, I brought it probably in 1995, but it took them a couple of years to write a paper. So they wrote a paper where they figured out this unhappiness law, the law of unhappiness, that unhappiness of men times unhappiness of women is equal to n. But then it kind of had a little bit of avalanche of activity in the statistical physics community. I will show you another paper which came out of this first kind of reincarnation of the stable marriage problem in statistical physics. But if you will notice that this law of unhappiness, by the way, it's a statistical law. So it just means that if you plot the unhappiness on a scatter plot, this product, it will be, square root of n plus minus square root of n. So it's not an absolute law, but it's statistical law. You will notice that if you are kind of halfway, each one gets square root of n. So now you see actually that the average unhappiness would be the best if you are in this midpoint, because the average unhappiness would be a square root of n here, and here it will be n over 2. So it is a big difference between. So if you are kind of, if you are a benevolent dictator and you want your kingdom to have happy marriages, but you also want them to be stable because you are not like this paranoid Soviet dictatorship who observes everybody and doesn't allow anybody to run away with anybody else. You want a marriage to be stable and yet the best for society. You will kind of encourage this breaks up to a point. When you reach the square root of n point, you say that's enough. Because otherwise, as we saw, if you keep breaking up, then you will kind of pull it. But of course, you know, breakup is a stochastic event, so there could be other breakups which will pull in the opposite direction. Okay, now here is another thing. So those guys published in 1997. It took an Italian team of Guido Caldarelli and Capocci and Lauretti. Many of you guys know those guys too. Italians thought about it and said, no, something is wrong here. Look. What is wrong? There is no beauty, right? There is no universal beauty. So far, all of those rankings were completely random, idiosyncratic. So this Italian team said, what if your opinion about the members of the opposite sex is correlated? First of all, if it's perfectly correlated, if everybody gets the same opinion on both sides, there is only one stable state and it's very boring. The best man gets the best woman, second best man gets the second best woman, and so on. As long as they are correlated, you are kind of getting this number of stable states is getting reduced from this number down to all the way down to 1 when the correlation is perfect. So those guys explored this and they say sex-oriented stable matching with correlated and incomplete information. Probably they also studied incomplete. I already forgot. Now, the final thing is that if you are really into kinky stuff, you can design this kind of frustrated ranking so you'll have exponentially many stable marriages, right? That is possible, but doesn't happen without really specific design. A few other math points, and then there will be life lessons, okay? So as I told you, Donald Knuth wrote his first book on this in 1976, translated to English in 1996. In this book, he formulated as problems for students 2 very promising directions. One became known as a roommate problem or unisex. You see, what if you have 2n individuals and you're just, each one ranks all other n-1, 2n-1 individuals. You want to find and you have rooms which house 2 of them, how to find that roommate problem. Turned out, again, Donald Knuth didn't know it, but the roommate problem sometimes doesn't have a stable solution. So the stable, when you have 2 sexes, the stable marriage, the man proposed an algorithm and others guarantee you existence of at least 1, right? For roommate problem, turns out that there may be not a single one. And by the way, this Irwin, who was one of the authors of this Green Bible, was the one who developed an efficient of n-square algorithm to find whether a stable matching exists for a roommate problem. So even though it may not have a unique solution, at least you can find in reasonable time whether a solution exists or more. It gets really, really hairy if you have more than three or more sexes. So the way Donald Knuth formulated, what if you have men, women, and dogs, and everybody ranks everybody else? How to find the triplets which nobody can run away? Here, not only it may have no stable solution, but in fact, this paper in 1991 shows that it's NP complete. Sometimes you cannot really even do in non-exponential time determine whether or not the solution exists. This is a kind of mathematical curiosities for those of you who are so inclined. Now I will do life lessons, and I clearly will probably try to keep my second story for next talk, which is fine because I think that two models in one talk is too many. So now one thing you already notice that in this man proposal algorithm, the man's life is full of disappointments. They constantly get dumped. They have to kind of propose again. And until the final state, they are not out of the woods. Even then, they are still vulnerable to divorces. On the other hand, in this particular algorithm, in man proposing algorithm, women get only better and better choice of partner in time. But this asymmetry in their unhappiness comes from the following little things, that men always start at the top of their list, whereas any woman gets, on average, in the middle of her list, because she gets the first proposal somewhere statistically at n/2, and then she may get a little bit higher, but usually not much higher. that is the reason why the men get so much better deal than women. And I repeat once again that not only the men get the best deal on average, every man gets the best ever possible partner in a stable matching, according to the man proposing algorithm. So life lessons. Again, activity usually gets one a better deal, which is visible both in a proposing game, but also in a breakup game. The moment the women became active by either proposing or breaking up, they started getting better and better deal. So better be disappointed than safe. Now, the third one is also very relevant for where you start in life influences, but not fully deterministically where you end up. And that is exactly the point I wanted to make about the starting at the top and going down is much, much better than starting in the middle and going up. So if it is at all possible, start at the top. If not, then again, argue with the government to help you start near the top or somewhere at a reasonable place. Now, lesson 4, also quite interesting, that since the active side, which are men and the man proposing algorithm, always gets the best deal they can ever hope for in a stable marriage, they have absolutely no incentive to lie. Whereas a passive side, in principle, if they know everything in the game, they can lie. In fact, they probably should just keep rejecting people for a long time until they get a better proposal, right? So that is in part why when this variant of a stable marriage or college admission problem is run to assign US medical students to hospital for residency, surprisingly, even though it is hospitals which run this program, they let students to be an active site. It's of course run inside a computer. It's not like the student comes physically to the hospital, here is my admission, please accept me. It's all run in the computer, but the students are an active site because they don't want students to try to manipulate the system. Okay. So that is, I'm done with my sort of preaching and giving you life advice. Now let's move on to the model or theory number 1. As I said, this is a joint work by Akshit and Veronica Dubinkina. So it will be about dioxically shifting microbes. And since we didn't really discuss it much, and again, this one will be about one-on-one marriages, no lovers, no funny business. So it will be a Pride and Prejudice is a book to keep in mind when we are thinking about it. But before I go to this, let me just briefly introduce you what I mean by dioxically shifting strategies. So here are kind of the 3 ways microbes can use resources provided to them in the environment. The most familiar one for many of you, because it's closest to Lotka-Volterra model, is when you have resources of the same type, for instance, multiple carbon sources, which are all substitutable for each other. So you can substitute one carbon source for another as long as you have the enzymes to utilize them. And if you are presented, the bacteria which are co-utilizing those resources means that if you put this bacteria in a soup of 3 resources, it will start eating all of them together. Maybe at different rates, maybe it will have a slightly higher flux of the orange one and slightly lower flux of the red one. But in the end, as you see, if you follow what is going on with resources, they all start declining at the same time. And eventually all of them will be consumed, okay? The other example, which will be relevant for my model number 2, which I may or may not start today, if not today, then I will start it tomorrow, is when you have 2 resources, but of very different kinds, say carbon and nitrogen, or carbon and phosphorus, which both of them are required for your survival. So you will obviously also use them together because you really need both of them to be taken up from the environment. But notice what is happening here. Whereas here the game goes until all the resources are depleted down to 0. Here, one of the resources will always be in excess. So in this particular example, say this is a nitrogen, it was given in a higher concentration than I need for survival. So when I depleted the carbon, some of the nitrogen was still left over. So, and it will remain there. This unused nitrogen will remain in the environment until maybe some other microbe will eat it up. And now this is a sequential or dioxic utilization, which is actually, as a father of two boys, I am quite familiar with it. If you present your children with a bunch of resources, they will never eat them all at once. They will always go for candy first and for something slightly less unhealthy, and finally only then they will eat the healthy stuff. The microbes are just like this. If you present them 3 resources, and actually the vast majority, I don't know the statistics by the way, but my intuition is that most of the carbon sources in this glucose, lactose, in sugar group are utilized sequentially, meaning that the microbe has this priority list. It prefers nutrient 1 to nutrient 2, it prefers nutrient 2 to nutrient 3. So if you give it all 3 resources at once, it will first use only the nutrient number 1, will not even touch 2 and 3. That's why you see here that the resource levels remain exactly flat until the resource 1 is out. This is when it is depleted. Only then it starts depleting resource number 2. And only when the resource number 2 is depleted, it starts depleting resource number 3. What is also important, not for the talk I will give today, but for the talk I will give tomorrow or on Friday, is that there are those lags, which are time intervals when you finished using resource number 1, but you haven't yet started using resource number 2. And the reason why you are not growing during this time is that you have this proteome, proteome enzyme, enzymes part of your proteome, which you allocated to all of them. All of the forces were thrown at utilization of resource number 1. Now you need to rewire your economy to utilize resource number 2, and it takes some time. So this rewiring takes time, and this is known as a lag time. Now, so for my model number 1 or theory number 1, I will be working with those guys with sequentially utilizing microbes. For model number 2, I will be dealing with essential resources. And again, maybe I will start with a little bit of the mathematical machinery for it, and we'll go into the meat of the model tomorrow. So let's see. So for theory number 1, as I said, we will be working with dioxic microbes. This is an interesting aside from original paper by Monod in 1949, who discovered this dioxy. Back then, he was working with only pairs of resources. That's why it's a dioxy. Strictly speaking, if you have 3 resources, it would be trioxy, 4 resources, quadroxy, and so on, even though nobody uses it. Yes?
No, it was about the previous slide when you said there's no textbook model. Did you mean something that also incorporates the lag? Or
well, let's put it this way. Yeah, let's see, where is it?
Yes.
Yeah, well, no textbook model in the literature. Well, lag or no lag, the ecology literature, as far as I know, did not really develop those, what happens to dioxically shifting microbes in serially diluted environments. If I'm wrong, point me to the right reference.
I mean, I could think of this as, in terms of the Tillman thing, is in the first case, the growth is the sum of all the growths. In the second is the minimum of the growths, and the third is the maximum of the growths.
Yes, by the way, no, yes and no. So here is the thing, that Tillman and company all developed all of their models in chemostats. In chemostats, you don't have dioxin, never, ever. That was one of the things which doomed our stable marriage problem from a practical application, because our brain was wired to think about it in terms of a chemostat. In a chemostat, you are co-utilizing. Even the microbes which are dioxic, you deplete your resources down to the levels where co-utilize, or you are using one resource, but you never shift between the resources. So in some sense, what you are saying is a good example, but it never really works in practice. By the way, just to parse a little bit this question for people who don't understand, so it's commonly assumed that when you are doing a dioxy, you start with a resource which gives you the fastest growth, proceed to the resource which gives you second fastest growth, and so on. Even though it is frequently the case, it's by far not an absolute law. There are microbes which are actually violated. We call them anomalous bugs, anomalous microbes in our paper with Akshit and others. And again, experimentally, if you go and sample the microbes in the soil, you will find there will be plenty of microbes who will be actually violating this rule. So in this sense, the max growth rate also doesn't literally hold always. So you may say, okay, if you are operating a chemostat under conditions where the abundance of the nutrients is high, which means your dilution rate is actually fairly fast. You need to make the microbes to grow fast. I haven't seen the experiments, but I can conceive that the microbe will decide to use only one nutrient. And then it will be, and if this microbe is also satisfies this rule that the nutrient it will use will give it the maximum growth rate, then it will be max of, just like you said in Tillman, you will have the max of this. What I mean the model was not developed is that the real model for this you need is when you do a batch culture growth or serial dilution, right? And that's why in all of those examples, I don't really emphasize chemostat. I emphasize what happens when you give a lot of resources, how they're getting depleted, and you know, as I'll explain in a lecture or so, you need to think about depletion times instead of resource concentrations. You need to think about when exactly each resource gets depleted. So those are, if you want, those Tillman coordinates for this problem. Okay. Now, a little kind of story about this is a mono curve from 1949. An interesting aside for those of you who are experimentally minded is how easy it is to experimentally determine the resource hierarchy in bugs. So all Mono did in 1949 is he measured optical density, which even a fool can do. And he just mixed glucose and sorbitol, in this case, in different ratios. He mixed them in 50 to 150, 100 to 100, and 150 to 50. And you notice that this lag, which is quite noticeable, happens early on when you give a little bit of glucose. Happens later when you give it more glucose, and happens even later when you give it a lot of glucose. So by just observing those curves, you can immediately say that this bug utilizes glucose first and only then switches to sorbitol. This is a low-tech solution. You know, you can all, you know, get a bug, interrogate it on pairs or more of resources and determine this hierarchy. Okay. So now, how does it connect to the marriage game? You probably already got half of the story. You see that the microbes, just like, let's say, man in our story, have preferences towards nutrients. They rank nutrients 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But you say, well, resources here do not have a say, right? The resources will be eaten by whoever is, you know, whoever prefers it. So resources don't have a choice. However, the microbes compete for resources. So if you want, it's a little bit like this marriage in some archaic societies when the men were fighting for women and women did not have a say, right? So in this case, what all we need to do to apply the stable marriage problem to those dioxic communities, we need to say, well, microbes have a preference towards resources, but also they have something which we call competitive abilities towards a resource. And whenever you can almost think this competitive ability as resources ranking microbes, because only if the better microbe switches to a resource and it can kind of outcompete the microbe which is currently utilizing this resource, it will displace it and force it to switch to another resource. So you see what is going on here. It's like this you know, patriarchal marriage in which there is fights for fights for spouses and preference towards spouses. Maybe the only kind of part which is not terribly realistic is that you are saying that your competitive ability for different resources are not the same, right? So maybe if you are just a stronger man, you will find better for all the resources, but not true here. So let's consider a little toy model first. So microbial love square story. So consider two microbes, red bug and a yellow bug. They have two resources, and this is their preferences, right? The red bug loves resource, which I call nutrient here, nutrient 1. This bug loves nutrient 2, and the second choice is the opposite. Now, this is a competitive ability. This is why I call it a love triangle, because, well, the red bug loves N1, but it's not terribly competitive for resource 1. So it is the second in competitive ability. However, and the same is true for a yellow bug, it loves N2 but cannot compete for it efficiently. So that is the story how those alternative stable states arrive. Just like in our little exercise with men proposing and women proposing algorithms, you can have two in this toy system. You can have two stable states. One is when each bug gets the top choice resource, N1 and N2. And it is stable because if, for instance, because no bug has incentive to switch a resource, right? So it is stable because the bugs already got the best deal they could. They have absolutely no incentive to switch to another resource. You can also imagine a nutrient optimal stable states in which each bug gets the resource for which it can compete the most. N1 and N2, that will be alternative state. And here, of course, the red bug would love to switch to his favorite resource number 1, but he cannot outcompete the bug which is currently using it. So the yellow bug dominates this resource. Even if the red bug will switch and say, get out of here, he will say, no way, because I'm better than you on using this resource. So both are stable states. If you prepare the system in one of them, it will remain there forever. But now the interesting story comes, what happens concerns transitions between stable states. So let's just thicken the plot a little bit, introduce a blue bug. The blue bug is just like a yellow bug in the sense that it prefers resource number 2. It's also a very weak bug. Why a weak bug? Because it actually is the third in the ranking of competing for resource 1 and the second in a competition for resource 2. So what if you have a community in which bugs got their favorite choice, and now you introduce a blue bug? The blue bug will go to just like man in our man proposed algorithm, it will go to its top choice resource N2. And it just happens that on a resource N2, it's better than its current utilizer, the yellow bug. So it will kind of kick out the yellow bug, says, I now claim the resource N2, and a yellow bug will switch to its less favored resource, which for a yellow bug will be resource N1. So the yellow bug will switch to resource N1, and it just happens that the yellow bug is better than the red bug in resource N1. So it will kick out the red bug from the resource N1. The red bug will not disappear from the system. It just will, just like man in our game, will lower its expectation and will switch to the resource N2. And voila, N2 is better than the blue bug on resource N2. So it will kick out the blue bug. So again, the lesson here is that we had this state in which microbes were happy. And then we introduced an invader. Invader did its magic. And then you ended up, and finally it was outcompeted. It disappeared from the community, but it did its dirty job. Now it ended up, it left the community in another state where the bugs aren't happy, right? So this happens when you introduce competition. So again, if you take a little bit of philosophy, which I was supposed to take on the next slide, but I will jump ahead of myself and do it right now. When you have a competition, when you transiently at least have more competition between the bugs, you have now more bugs and resources. This perfect state when the bugs got their top choice gets degraded. But you can also imagine another situation in which you introduce an extra resource. Let's say you introduce a prebiotic instead of probiotic. So you introduce a resource number 3. And in this case, you introduced it here, and the bug switched to this, the yellow bug switched to this resource. Then suddenly it vacated the top choice for the bug number 2. Now bug number 2 switched to this resource, and then it vacated resource number 2, which is the top choice for the yellow bug. So the bugs now got their top choices, and then you, in fact, at this point, you may either remove a nutrient or leave it there. But you see that relaxing a competition by introducing more resources and bugs leads to happier bugs. So competition leads to unhappy bugs. On the other hand, having more resources than bugs leads to a happy bug. So this is the philosophy I wanted to say. Yes?
Why did N1 shift to, why did the yellow bug shift to
let's see. Let's look at the bug, yellow bug. N3 is better than N1. It was using N1, but N3 is better, so it shifts to N3. It would be even more happy to shift here, but not yet, because this niche is occupied by the red bug, and it cannot outcompete the red bug, right? So there is an empty niche here. It shifts to an empty niche because it's better niche according to the yellow bug ranking. Then it vacates the niche which was desired by the red bug. The red bug loves resource N1 more than resource N2. The red bug shifts to N1. Now this niche is vacant. Now it is up for yellow bug to grab it. So this N2 niche is empty now, and that's how it got this happy niche. And at this point, as I said, you may either remove N3 or keep it. It doesn't matter, because the bugs will be happy in those two niches which they prefer. Okay, so I already said that the philosophy, I will not repeat myself. Increasing the competition makes all the bugs worse off. Relaxing the competition makes all the bugs better off in this particular theory. Now let's look at another more complicated system. 7 bugs, 7 resources. I will not bore you with this table. I'll just say that in this case, n log n generate, well, actually, maybe it's not even close to n log n over e log n, but the fact is that in this particular system of preferences, there are 5 stable states, S1, S2, S3, S5. As I already told you, all of the states are in some sense hierarchical. So if we were to play this game here, we could have started with this state, which is the best for all the microbes, right? The way this hierarchy works is that this is a state where bugs get the most desirable resources they can have in a stable state. That's where they have the worst nutrients. And there are kind of imperfect, directed acyclic graph, which tells you that if I will remove specific nutrients, remember removing nutrients, I didn't have it on a previous example, but removing nutrients temporarily increases the competition for remaining nutrients, which means that the bugs will be forced to get a worse off choice. So you are kind of, you are living in a more competitive world, so you will end up with a worse choice. So removing nutrient 5 switches here, removing nutrient 1 switches here, removing nutrient 3 switches here, removing nutrient 1 switches here, and so on. So this is all the transitions which are triggered by, if you want, breakups. You may say that I removed the nutrient and then reintroduced it. It's almost the same thing as we were playing this breakup game. Imagine that instead of removing, the wife just disappeared for a while, and then the husband started lowering down the choice, and then the one wife reappeared, and that's where the transition happens. On the other hand, removing microbes will do the opposite. Removing microbes relaxes competition, so it vacates some niches, and it leads to the opposite type of transitions. So the take-home message here, which I think I have one more slide, but the take-home message is that there are multiple states, and you can trigger, almost like in this game, you can control the transition between those states by either adding or removing either microbes or nutrients. And the general logic is that whatever increases competition will lead to a worse off states, whatever increases competition leads to a better off states. But not all the removal trigger a transition. So here only nutrient 1, nutrient 5, and nutrient 3, if you are in state 4, lead to a transition.
Does the removing of a microbe and reintroduction of the microbe result in a?
So here, in all cases I remove and then I reintroduce the microbe. So it's almost like, well, how should I do it? I already forgot, but with nutrients, again, we didn't want to introduce extra ones because we didn't want to populate new entries in the table. So we transiently removed, but the moment somebody wanted to shift to this nutrient, we reintroduced it back, something like this. And here you remove the microbe by, say, knocking it out with antibiotics, but then eventually we reintroduced it through colonization in a small kind of inoculum.
Yeah, so basically here what we did was you knock out something, let's say N5 over there, you let the game proceed, eventually you reach a state where all but one species would have a nutrient. And at that point, you imagine the nutrient comes back and it gets paired with this thing. Then that's where the thing stops. So it's in that sense, the nutrient was transiently removed and then reintroduced.
And it was reintroduced again. Would it lead to an unstable structure or a...
So yeah, this is sort of where the sort of game comes in. So just to repeat, the question was if you were on the right, where a really competitive microbe was removed and then was reintroduced, wouldn't it like to go back to things where it was? And I think here the answer is no. For the purposes of this game, it goes to the thing that's available, and then as soon as it goes there, the game stops. You know, it might be somewhat artificial, but this is the game after all, right? Yeah. So that's what we assume.
You had a question?
I mean, I think you thought about this, but what would happen if there is more number of resources than?
Okay, that's a very good question, because in fact, this whole kind of marriage thing is very, very sensitive to this ratio. So the moment one side exceeds the other in numbers, it very quickly results in a big relaxation of the competition. So again, if you have a slightly more resources than microbes, you will get the world in which microbes will be super happy, because there are all those alternative niches to occupy, and they will be able to pick close to their optimal niche, and vice versa. If there are a little bit fewer resources than microbes, the competition would be fierce. So, and this is literally like not by factor 2, but by percentages, 10% or something. So it has been studied. All right, I have a few more slides. I actually have one kind of, so one slide I just wanted to give you a flavor about how many states you end up with this random matching, sort of this n log n game, to give you an idea of how about it. So if you have 10 to 10 microbes, on average, you will have 3 states. In fact, this 5 states and 7 by 7 was unusually high. And say 50 by 50, you give you roughly 19. This is a histogram of the number of states. As I said, it has a fat tail, so you can, if you are into really, really twisted rankings, you can get as many as 160 states, but on average, you will get something like 2019. And for 200 by 200, you get 86 states. So again, n log n is n divided by e log n is a slow function. So it is comparable to n divided by some small number, 1 or 2. The other thing which I wanted to tell you, I think I have 15 minutes, but I have a logical break in my talk, so I will probably, after I tell you this biological story, I will probably wrap up and leave the CNN story for my next lecture. So I just wanted to, even though, as I said, this kind of switching of microbes and nutrients is not directly realizable. And the reason why it is not realizable is that you cannot, the only way you can think about it is what happens in a chemostat. And in a chemostat, you really don't have the situation where you mix dioxic bugs in a chemostat and they will use one nutrient and then will shift. So that is why we thought hard how to introduce it. And we didn't find a real kind of direct experimental implementation of this model. Nevertheless, some of our conclusions were sort of validated in more realistic model, about which I will tell you in a lecture or two. And one of the particular things which we actually saw already in our little tutorial, remember when we run exercise number 2, every man had a different top choice woman. And that meant that the whole proposal game ended up on the first round. So everybody proposed to the top choice candidate, she accepted, and that's the end of the story. So if you want happier bugs, the happier bugs have complementary top choice preferences, right? It turned out that this is still a true story when we realistically assemble microbial community of dioxic bugs not in a chemostat, but in a serially diluted environments. What we found is that eventually the stable community which we found had those top choices of all the bugs being different from each other. So this part is correct. Now I wanted to give you a flavor about in our ISME paper, we we needed to connect the whole story to real life, and we choose this the studies by Eric Martin's lab from University of Michigan, who studies different Bacteroides species. He actually has about 6 or 7 of them, maybe even more. All of them are of the genus Bacteroides, and Bacteroides, many of you know, they like polysaccharides. So Bacteroides inhabit our gut, and they are the guys who are happy when we eat fiber. So that your doctor or your wife tells you, eat more fiber, eat more fiber. You eat more fiber, and who really gets happy are Bacteroides, because we cannot digest fiber, and it goes through all the way down to our lower intestine, and then Bacteroides start chomping up fiber, those polysaccharides into their constituent parts, and then the constituent parts are consumed both by Bacteroides and by some other species, and the entire trophic cascade of metabolites in the gut starts. So it turned out that the Bacteroides are very picky about which fibers they like best. So here are 2 closely related organisms, and this lab figured out their hierarchy. So again, those CSP, PGA, or whatever are abbreviations of some unpronounceable polysaccharides. But this guy, for instance, like CS. Actually, both of them have the same top choice preference. They have the CS preference. And on the other hand, after the top choice preference, things go very differently. Actually, maybe in hindsight, they are a good example of the top smart guys. So you get the top choice who gives you the fastest growth. Everything else is random. For instance, this one likes this second, this one likes it number 6, and so on. And again, there are some ties here also. They were not able to tell which one of those 3 nutrients it prefers, so they assign all of them to have the rank number 3. Now, in our study, we tried to implement this system. Unfortunately, they did not measure everything, so we had to improvise a little bit. So we had to kind of assign those rankings. But at least the names of the fibers and the names of the Bacteroides species are correct. They are from the gut. And the point we wanted to make is exactly the point that I made before, that if you happen to have the bugs which have the complementary top choice preferences, they will be much happier, and we somehow translated happiness to their abundance. So this is our kind of a connection to reality plot, which was not connection, not to reality, but to, it is a theory. I warned you, it's a theory. So our theory tells that if you have the bugs, those Bacteroides bugs, with the top choice complementaries, they will be happiest. If you have them randomly, they will have roughly half as happy. But if you will make them all kind of super conflicting, if all of them will choose the same top choice, the same second choice, then they will be the least happy. So that is kind of, oh yeah, I have actually a little bit of a story which will just help me fill the remaining 8 minutes. I wanted to talk about control because I announced that my title that I am in a bioengineering department. So when I want to pretend that I am a bioengineer, I'm saying, how about we control it? Because bioengineers always want to control everything. Physicists want to understand, but bioengineers want to control. So in fact, the interesting story here is that people who studied the control theory, in particular, well, the control theory is a mature discipline in mathematics and in engineering, but then a bunch of physicists, including Yang Liu, who was actually a student at UIUC, then he was a postdoc in Barabasi lab, and now he is a faculty at Harvard Medical School, and we have a bunch of papers together. But when he was in Barabasi lab, he sort of applied the idea from the control theory, how you control a graph. It turned out that if you have a graph, the control theory, if you want to control a graph, you basically need to, like this, for instance, a graph, you want to divide nodes in a graph into pairs, and you need to make sure that those pairs do not have any shared nodes. So you want to basically break up the graph into a collection of pairs of nodes, and you are not allowed to use the same node in more than one pair. And of course, the pairs need to be connected by a link in a network. The network is controllable if you can break it into those pairs. This is remarkably similar to this kind of marriage approach, because you are kind of selecting marriages out of all possible. Just imagine that those pairs which are not connected, they are just somebody who hates each other so much that they will prefer to remain single than to get married, right? So you may argue that if you are, and people also talk about the optimal control. Sometimes you have a weighted network, and the weighted network means that every edge has a particular number assigned. And if you want to find the optimal control breakdown of a graph, you want to find the subset of solve an optimal matching problem, which is find the set of pairs of links on a graph which has the smallest number, smallest sum of the weights on links. So this is, in fact, a problem which has been solved by nobody else but Mizar and Parisi back in '87. Parisi, of course, is a spin glass Nobel Prize winner. And it is known as a maximal matching problem, which is a close cousin of the stable matching problem or stable marriage problem. The only thing that they don't need to worry about, because as I told you early on, when you think about this problem as a physicist, you don't really worry about stability. When you think about it, the problem as an economist or as an ecologist, you always say, what if they don't want to live like this? What if the new species will come and outcompete this species? What if they will switch preferences and so on? So, and the interesting aside is that Mizar and Parisi solved the optimal best matching problem, which doesn't need to be stable, and found that the solution is roughly 0.82 square root of n. More precisely, it's pi squared divided by 12. So pi squared is something like 9, a little bit more than 9 divided by 12. What is important, if you now think about, remember that I told you that the best stable matching is square root of n. So what if you are a dictator? What if you live in North Korea, where you can literally tell people to get married to whoever the dictator assigned them to, and nobody will dare to run away? And what if you are a benevolent North Korean dictator who wants to assign the happiest, stable, unstable marriage in a society? He will actually be able to get a reduce unhappiness by about 18%. So you will go down from square root of n, which is unhappiness of a best stable matching, to the unhappiness of the best optimal unstable matching. So that is kind of the take-home message. And now I think 4 minutes. I'm perfectly timed to give you take-home messages. So the take-home message is that I guess the most kind of unusual property of the stable marriage model is this hierarchy of stable states and the ability to control switches between those stable states by either removal of nutrients or removal of microbes, or addition of nutrients and addition of extra microbes. So that is, to me, the most unusual thing, that you can control and manipulate this stable marriages. And again, tomorrow I will tell you another, just to give you a teaser about what tomorrow's lecture will be about, at least the start of tomorrow's lecture. I will switch from a theory to a model, and a model will be about how microbes compete for essential resources, carbon and nitrogen. And it turns out that the stable marriage problem again will make an appearance in a particular variant of it, which is, in fact, one side will remain monogamous, the other side will polygamous. So that's stay tuned for the next. So as I said, those are my principles. If you don't like them, I have others. Thank you.
Hi.
Yes.
The addition of nutrients allows the microbes to sort of coexist more, right? But this actually, if I compare this to Sarah's talk, that's actually, if you add more nutrients in that machine oil, then they start becoming competitive. I was wondering if
I don't remember this message from her talk. So she said that if you add more nutrients, they start more competitive. I didn't quite get this message from her talk. Maybe you're right, but again, her system is closer matched to what I will be talking about tomorrow, because what is quite clear is that in Sarah's case, the real limiting factor are amino acids. So the two of her bugs are auxotrophs, which means they cannot synthesize amino acid. And it is quite clear that some of the most unusual transitions in her community come from the cross-feeding of amino acids between the bugs. So it is possible that, you know, if again, I didn't quite get this message which you are emphasizing, that addition of nutrients increases competition, but it is possible that it's through some, no, in principle, it shouldn't happen.
So if I remember, it was adding amino acids that the competition was increasing.
Increased. Well, yeah, okay. That actually goes along with this story. This is perfect. Hold on to this question until the next talk I will give. And I have a perfect answer here, because this is exactly what happens when you have rate limits. So the reason why her community is diverse, relatively diverse, is because each bug is getting limited by different resource, and it's not a carbon resource, it's amino acids. If you have this community with multiple essential nutrients, making one side of the story flooded with nutrients actually decreases diversity. It's not because of the competition, well, it is because of the fact that before the bugs were prevented from competing for carbon sources by being limited by amino acids. Once you make amino acids plentiful, they suddenly, all those bugs switch and start competing for carbon, and diversity decreases. This is a well-established fact. There are actually nice studies in some experimental field in England where over 40 years, they were experimenting with adding nutrients to the soil, but they were looking at plant diversity. And what is always happens is if you flood the soil with fertilizers, nitrogen, phosphorus, you actually, the diversity drops, because while they are still limiting resources, there are not bugs, but plants in this case, which are limited, the growth limited by carbon, nitrogen, by nitrogen, phosphorus, maybe even iron, not in plants, but in the ocean, it could be iron. Once you flood those essential nutrients, the effective number of nutrients for which the community competes is reduced. This is a little bit counterintuitive. You add resources in concentration, but you reduce the number of resources for which the competition actually happens, and you increase the sort of the bottleneck through which the community has to pass. So that is my interpretation of what is going on. I'm 95% sure I'm right in case of Sarah's experiment, that if you flood the amino acids, you just start, all of them will start competing for those carbon sources. And, you know, since she doesn't know who is using what, it's probably, you know, it probably will be they will all kind of fight for the same thing, and only one survives. Yes and no. This is actually one of the ongoing problems, one of the ongoing struggles and Akshit and I and Jacopo are discussing how to overcome it. What happens with the lag is that, well, you are, again, it's a good question which to discuss after my second lecture, but I will give you a flavor of what goes on with the lag. When you are, normally, lag turns you into semi-specialist. Why? Because you use your top choice resource, then especially if your lag is long, you are switching, but by the time you will switch, maybe your second and third choices will already disappear. So the amount of resources you will effectively utilize will be reduced. You will become maybe not a specialist, but you know, you will only have a chance to use your resource number 1 and resource number 4, because 2 and 3 will be eaten before you have a chance to switch to them. So which is, you know, may increase diversity, but in a boring way, because if you wanted specialists, we'll just, you know, populate the world with specialists, and that will be a really boring world.